Huh? Great. So shall we start?
Yes, yes.
But I can't see the images once they start speaking. Huh? I can't see it all. Should I start or what?
Yeah, yeah, you can start. I mean, I'm recording. Yeah, yeah.
But
I can see you.
Acha, but I can see the front page of Romi ji, or if someone is speaking. I mean, that's how it should pop up, na?
Are you on your laptop or on your phone or something?
I'm on a laptop.
I mean, then you go on the view and choose for gallery option
Okay, okay, got
on
it.
the
Not
right
okay,
hand side top.
great. Okay, great. So let me start. Hi, welcome, Romi Saab and Ganesh, because uh, it's really nice that we are starting this discussion on initially on Zoom, and then perhaps we'll be taking it on the Facebook as well. Somehow we couldn't do it live. Perhaps there was some technical glitch, which was beyond our uh, scope and capacity. So what we are going to do is we are going to record this discussion, and then further we are going to post it on YouTube and finally on the Facebook. So all those viewers who are now calling me incessantly on the phone, I just want to tell them, please hold on for some time, and then we'll be there. The primary purpose of the discussion actually triggers from an article that was written in Hindu yesterday, and that is, this whole bunch of ideas that are coming up. What should shape the Indian cities? And in fact, Romi Saab, you were one of the, I mean, you in fact triggered this whole discussion some 2 months ago. So I just want to go straight away to you, because that's what we are witnessing. I mean, we've seen different phases of our urban era of development of our towns, and not to go back to 5,000 years. Of course, we can go back to that period as well. But cities have played an important role in the overall evolutionary process of our, humankind. And the very recent cities we see are more of a manifestation of what we call industrial capitalism, where millions and millions of people were supposed to be shifted from the countryside to the cities, and that's how the whole layers of mobility, housing, and all were supposed to be built. But in this argument, the discussion is that, especially after the construction of the Ram temple, where it is believed that almost 1 lakh crore will be spent in Ayodhya. So, is this a new narrative getting built across India? That's the first point. So, would we have a somewhat changed paradigm as far as our town development is concerned? Because we've seen a very top-bottom architecture of urbanization starting from the JNU era, even earlier, for that matter, when those plans were written, at the central pivots. And so, is this a kind of new paradigm where you'll have more holy cities coming up, where cities would not be seen as workspaces, or cities which have been some kind of centers of enlightenment as well? So are we witnessing some kind of change in narrative? So that's one. And second, is it some kind of revivalism? I mean, how do you understand this? This whole bunch of the larger Hindu religion narrative that is being built. So would holy cities would be like steering the urbanization process? And historically also, I mean, how do you see this as a relationship between what we have already experienced in the past? So if it is not the same kind of revivalism, what is different in it? And how we should be cautious about the changes that are taking place. So over to you, Romi Saab.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tikinder, Atul, and Kanishk. Wonderful opportunity. One of the great advantages of having a discussion like this is that you can take an article in which you wrote for the Hindu, where only bare skeletal arguments can be developed because of the length of the text that is permitted in the published page. Here we are in an oral discussion. We can perhaps explore slightly wider aspects that the article doesn't give you time to consider. And the two events which you open your article with sets the tone for the discussion today. Parliament and Ram Temple, both large monuments constructed at the same time simultaneously. And of course, it is for people like us who spend our times thinking about things, that we need to place these events in some kind of narrative of our times. And in order to do that, we have to see what is the importance of these two expensive structures in the social fabric. Not necessarily as you had to do to consider the urbanization, because your article has to be very specific and raise certain arguments only. We need to place both these events within a larger context. And I would like to start with the global context. Fundamentally, is the world experiencing something new? We know in India we are going through a very innovative period of our history where we are not sure where we are going. But basically, there is a larger question I want to ask, because I'm looking at wider global events. Has religion become more important for our lives now across the world? Is religion slightly becoming something people are returning to? Is there a conflict, secondly, between religion and modernism? Because for some, see this as a fundamental conflict between the old world religion, which they had assumed the European Enlightenment had left behind, and suddenly it has become more important. For instance, let's look at the war in Gaza. Here we have the Zionists who are intensely using their religious card in order to justify their actions. What are they claiming? They claim that 2,000 years ago, God gave them this land. And they wage a most vicious genocide today to get that land back. So we could see this as the importance of religion over the desire to build a modern society. And let's look at another event, which is also, I think we're all getting shaken up with these things. We should not imagine for a moment that only in India things are happening. The unipolar world in which American hegemony dominated has begun to weaken. And what is the impact? Nationalism is rising. Nationalism is rising in Africa, nationalism is rising in Europe. Everybody's becoming talking about their nation, about their boundaries. Now, these things had been suppressed by the large umbrella presence of America. Now, once you start breaking up your sense of knowledge into multiple countries, into multiple cultures, where everybody is asserting their own identity, their own nationalism, it is inevitable that you want to look for something unique to be able to signify how you're different from the rest of the world. If we choose to introduce ourselves as the spiritual capital of the world, we are only trying to create a new identity for ourselves in the coming century. Because earlier, it used to be very simple. We had to be like Europeans. We wanted to be like Americans. We wanted our society to be like Americans, our economic growth to be like Americans. But now we are seeing before our eyes that that model we had worshipped since independence suddenly becoming a bit fragile. And so we are asking ourselves, who are we? And when we ask ourselves, who are we are not the same question. We are not asking the same question that somebody like Nehru asked. Nehru's question was, how can we become a modern state? How can we become a global power? That's not the question being asked now today. Now the question is, who are we? How can we be ourselves? And how can we be different? In the case of many of the African countries, for instance, where colonization was going on till very late, till recently, those African countries are saying, how can we not be like the French who dominated us or like the Americans who dominated us? And then underlying this quest, because I think the issue of religion and secularity, the question of the role of parliament and the role of temples, this is all linked to a very fundamental question. What is the nature of our constitution? Because this document is lying at the moment dormant, because it has not been questioned, nobody has referred to it. Every group of people pressure group of people is creating their own values. They are not, it's not as if we are going through a period of time where people are questioning uh, what is the role of the constitution, can it guide us into the future. It's almost as if we are admitting silently without saying so, does the constitution have any uh, picture for us of the future? Does it have any principles that we should follow in the future? And I understand that this is doubt. 108 countries have got written constitutions. Most of them they wrote in the 20th century. So what I'm hinting at is, as the world, the global world is turning around into a multipolar world, everything in each country in that globe of ours is beginning to question ourselves. And it is very important, and I'll just conclude this point with you, Tikinder. Now, it's very important for us to discover who we are. We have to find out, are we on a path to a modern future, or are we on a path to a direction in which our history counts a lot? Let's put it that way. I'm not going to be provocative on this, but the modern state, the modern future we have is built on an assumption that history is not important for us. We've left it behind. Come on, it's there. Let's make our own future. And the people who believe that history is important for us are saying, listen, your identity comes out of history. But then we turn around and say, what history? Then they'll say, we'll produce the history for you. We'll make it for you. If you are not very much connected with your history, we are going to bring the past in front of you. And we will help you find who you are. So I want to link this up with this larger question. This is a search for identity. And somebody has an idea what they think it ought to be.
So I mean, Robin, it's very interesting. So, I mean, history all of not all of a sudden, but defining our futures. But do you find, because we've seen how cities, towns, these are important centers where accumulation of capital takes place, and that's the process. I mean, we define it capitalism, or neoliberal capitalism. So, where the surplus that gets generated out of the cities, which way should it flow? Which way should it direct? And not to miss the point, whether it will be going for religious good or should it go for social good? What do we mean by social good? But before we come to that, because there's another very interesting thing that when you go back into history, I mean, so why is this form of revivalism different from the kind of revivalism that we've seen in the 4th, 5th century AD? Because we've seen that also, the whole incarnation of Sanatan Dharma. Not that it was limited to the towns and cities, but definitely it was more linked with the overall developmental strategies in the Indian subcontinent. So, how do you see the connections between 5th century BC to 5th century AD? I'm being a little provocative because we know the period that we're talking about. And so, what are the similarities now? And what is the major distinction there? I mean, you pointed out it's more to do with secularity. So, I want young, especially young people, to know about that, because it's not that simple. And, it's not just a question of euphoric kind of simulation or euphoric kind of the environment that is being generated. It's far, far more than, and I think it's far more pernicious, it's far more insidious. And once it goes into our veins, I think we are gone for a toss. How do you see it, Ro?
Well, I come to your article, you say the role of the city is very critical in this. And that is the spine of your article. In fact, you are asking, what is the role of the city? And how is it going to get affected by these new events and monuments that are getting made? Now, it's very clear, as you've said on just now, that the city is essentially a wealth accumulator. It is able to give you uh, employment, it is able to give you profit, you are able to save, and it also gives you culture and it gives you a sense of identity where you find friends, etc. And when you think about the rural areas, which are very, very different from that, you tend to favor cities. You tend to develop economic theory around a concept that cities are the multipliers of wealth, and therefore cities must be built. There must be urbanization uh, so that wealth can be multiplied. Now, these are basically the rules of the Industrial Revolution. Everybody wanted to industrialize. Now, the problem comes for a country like India. In India, what has happened is that the city has remained a dominant container of the wealthy middle class, which is being served by extremely poor rural migrants. That is the picture of the city. And it is well within the history of urbanism that the Indian city is only what was there in the early industrial periods of this world. The question is, we are not able to resolve this. We are not able to divert our economic resources to be able to remove our inequality. We are content to let unequal people come and serve the wealthy. Therefore, the city becomes a very strange kind of apartheid city because the slums are very large and the poor are very voluminous. So you actually, in a sense, have the makings of an apartheid situation. Now, you have a choice of either using the modern city to be able to give equality and to work towards social goals, or you have a choice of distracting those who are not very wealthy and I have to live and have to eke a living out of their poor services in the slums and in the cities. It is easier for them to actually go into more kind of a religious mindset than into a revolutionary mindset. And these are opposite things. Because if revolution was the ultimate goal of modernism, which undoubtedly it was, then the religious disciplines, etc., and involvement in religious faith is the opposite of that. I'm not going to use the Marxist definition of opiate of the people, etc., because it is in the case of India very much more complicated. Because even if you take the richest of the rich in India, they are very religious. So it's not as if we are living in a European world where the Enlightenment was able to defeat theology and were able to condemn the church and rob it of its wealth and just convert it into a capitalism. India is not like that. India is a complicated problem because everybody is religious. What is interesting to me is that religion has remained hitherto almost as something of a personal matter. Yes, there were celebrations at recognized time, Holi tha, Dasara hai, ye sab. Lekin it was something which was a much more introverted activity. अपना कोई गुरु था, आप उनसे सवाल पूछते थे, टेलीविजन पे गुरु आते थे, आपको एडवाइस देते थे. It was never a social event. What happens with the building of religious monuments? You are pushing the religion into the social domain. when you start giving enormous number of holidays for every religious event, you are pushing religion into the social event, social realm. So these are the changes that are going on. And it's not only in India it's happening. It's happening, as I said, in Israel, it's happening in Ukraine, it's happening in all sorts of places where um, you will hear this sentence in American commentaries on political affairs. Oh, the Christian Democrats are the dominant people here. And you cannot displease the Christian Democrats. They are the Christian Democrats are holding these votes. So you are already referring in some of our most wealthy countries in this world, keep on making references to the Pope will get up and say, what has the Pope said? The Pope has condemned Gaza. Now this becomes a big event. So it's not as if religion is totally missing, but it is outside the social domain. Undoubtedly, it is outside the social domain. I think what we are trying in India to do is that we are accepting the fact that everybody is religious, everybody believes in some form of some religion or the other, and we should make this into a public event that is shared by a huge collection of people. Now, it's a separate argument what you're doing as merits or not, and I need to be very careful about how people think about this activity. But we must see it as a part of a global change taking place. And the change, I would say, is essentially, even for the young people, I would say, you have to, the critical debate tomorrow is, are you modern? Do you have modern values? Are you urban? Do you live in the city? Do you believe in accumulation of wealth? Or are you religious? Actually, you can't do both. I can't commit a crime and uh, punish the poor and then go and pray for forgiveness. We don't have that system. We don't can go into a Catholic confession room and clear our conscience. So we have to be very careful because greed is also a problem, as is relying too much on God to solve your problems is a problem. So I don't see the path ahead of us very clearly. These are very early time. Maybe, yeah, if that answers your question. See, the city then becomes, to me, still the vanguard of capitalist wealth accumulation. Nothing, whether you can, after all, we have constructed temples, Birla constructed temples in Delhi, people have constructed temples, and it has not changed the venue or the mood or the character of the city in the slightest. So we will ask again, what is to be achieved by making such large monuments with public money?
Okay. And before Kanish, you can pitch in when you want to add something, ask
Yeah,
Romi.
please.
But you have not answered my first question, the whole question of revivals. How do you find the connection between what happened in the Indian subcontinent in those 1,000 years, where we had this, revivalism of the larger Hindu from, what primarily, the later Vedic period when Buddhists had come in, fished in, as a different ideology, and, the surplus getting extracted, went to the Buddhist monasteries of the 5th century AD, we find all for some this drift taking place back again with the whole question of ideology. Do you find any similarity between that, though one religion taking over another? But here, as you've pointed out, it's not religion, it's basically on the ethics of modernism, modernity, the whole question of separation between religion and state. So, do you want to comment on that as well?
Yes, my only comment would be that it is very dangerous for us to take a historic justification in order to revive. Simply because, let me give you an example. The Buddhist Dharma was prevalent and dominant in the subcontinent for 1200 years.
Yeah.
Now, it vanished. So much, so thorough was this vanishing. you will not believe it, that there has never been a single manuscript, Buddhist manuscript found in India, ever. Now, how did we reconstruct our history from Dunhuang came, then from Sri Lanka? We learned and put together the fact that India had a Buddhist history. It was completely wiped out. The memory of it was wiped out. And this is not because of the Turkish invasion. This had started well before that. So the whole business of using anything to revive is essentially an invention, because history is dead. You want to revive it, you will have to reinvent it, because it has no voice. History, it is, you can go to a town like Mohenjo-daro. What you see is the foundations of the buildings. After that, you start inventing how the city. It's a total figment of your imagination. It's very beautiful, it's wonderful, but you cannot tell me what life was like in Mohenjo-daro because you found some rice grains here and some implements there, etc. I have a few things with which I can perhaps guess at reconstructing. So it's the similar thing about trying to talk about a golden age in history. Who knows what golden age was? I'll define the golden age. Somebody has not told me that this was a golden age. It is in the myths, it's in the Purans. But is there any real? It's an imagination. So what happens is that when the problem of revivalism comes, it's not for me revivalism. It is a modern invention of your history, because history has been invented. Now it allows other people to produce their own histories of the same period if they want. So if you are being dominated by force, or you're being dominated by arguments, or you're being dominated by punishments for talking alternatively or something, all you're doing is you're still playing with your invention and saying my invention of the past is better than your invention of the past. And in that, you can create all kinds of villains, you can create all kinds of victims, you can create all kinds of heroes and gods. There's nothing in history telling us that they were there. Nothing at all. You'll be absolutely shocked to know that the Hindu temples used to be great sources of accumulated wealth. Now we know the fact that gold was stored in their vaults and still is in the south, for instance, and that they were kingdoms where rajas became broke, and they used to raid the temples from another area. And they used to get, and if amongst the gold they used to get, there were some holy statues, they used to get lepers to piss on them. And then they were no longer sacred. Now,
Where do you find this? Where do you find this?
This is in the history of Kashmir,
Okay.
in the Raja Tarangini.
The Raj Tarangani in Kashmir. Yes.
So the story is about a very rich king who used to raid temples and pyramids and all, and accumulate and come back. They had a Chinese commander-in-chief who gave them chain, which was anti-arrows. He invented that. And they were able to carry out a lot of raids. But when he died, his children were quarreling amongst each other. They all could not divide the wealth. So they took the wealth, de-sacrificed it, and helped themselves to it. So you see, when you come across some moments of history like this where somebody happened to have recorded it, it makes you realize that please do not generalize in history. History is a series of individual incidents. Please do not make a continuous narrative. What is the continuous narrative? Is in the myths, in our books, that's it. Whether that represents the reality or not is up to you. And I would like to encourage your younger listeners to think about these things more deeply. Think about what values they want, because they have whole of tomorrow before them. When I grew up in a mono world. America was the ideal, the most successful part of the world. Now today's younger generation say, "Hey, who wants to be like them? Yeah, they're like being ruled by lunatics like Biden here." So everything is falling apart. And of course, it is in that vacuum that we are being offered a more plausible future through worship.
Last, Kanish, you can also pitch in with the last point. And how do you see the future to be? Because we know, I mean, once again, not generalizing, but from history, what are the alternatives, alternatives in what I'm not buying the UN definition of sustainable development goals, this 17 SDGs that we have. And we know how they're going to fall very soon. It's 2024, 2030. And we had the GST taking place, the global stock taking in COP. And we know we are nowhere near, not even 20% perhaps.
Yeah.
So how do we, in a country like which is a continent in itself, India, I mean, if things worsen, then I think it's really something which is indigestible. I mean, and not just for India, but for the entire South Asia and the world, perhaps, for that.
Well, I think what matters in the future, as in the past, what matters is your economic activity. What kind of economic activity are you following? And secondly, what is the mode of your governance? Now, we know for a fact that this model of governance where you have centralized rule over a nation state is a 19th century invention. It came up particularly during the colonial period, where the colonists went and defined countries and mapped them and grew them with lines which are actual boundaries, etc. Now, and imposed centralized rule on it so that they could control the various kinds of people. Now, it's very clear to me personally that such a mode of governance, which is heavily centralized and which is an economic activities which are heavily partial to the rich getting richer, these don't have much of a future. They do not have a future. We have to sit down and we have to discuss our future. We are not going to be told by any particular person what is their vision of the future, because we are multiple communities and we have historically governed ourselves separately. And if this subcontinent is to survive as a nation, it is not a boundary map that's going to hold us together. It is something, it is not a autocracy or the army or the police that's going to hold us together. What is going to hold us together is a common way of believing in each other, that we have to govern ourselves and respect each other, because it's not an idealistic thing I'm talking about. I'm just talking about a small, let me take a small state like Himachal or for that matter, Sikkim. These are very small states. They live in very special circumstances. You cannot rule them from the center with policies which are common to the rest of India. So each area, each panchayat will survive if there is global warming, if there is going to be difficult times ahead. They can do a lot of praying, but they are not going to help survive unless they begin to start governing themselves and solving their own problems. You cannot have, where have we got floods somewhere, we have earthquakes somewhere, we have global warming, sea flooding. You can't sit in the center and give solutions to all these things. COVID is coming, typhoid is coming. You have to break this up into self-governing units if we want a future for ourselves.
Great, Romi. I think that's our time
What
slotted.
about Kanish? We were waiting for Kanish to ask some questions here.
Kanish, if you want to just pitch in, maybe. Yeah, because then we have to hand over the space to someone else.
Yes.
Kanish, are you there? And Romi, see you soon. I mean, in Simla.
Yeah,
Sorry, 19th.
Yeah, okay. Right.
Ganesh, please go ahead. The last word, perhaps.
Well, I mean, it's been a fascinating conversation. I mean, just listening to both of you has been very interesting. I mean, I think let me just be, you know, one is that I think, I mean, and maybe you guys can close with some comments on just a few things that I'd like to add. One, I think that Rahul Mehrotra, for instance, in his book, in talking about the architecture of the last part of the modernist Indian architecture of the last part of the 20th century, had talked about what he called religious architecture, as these large prayer halls that whether it was the whole Shanti Stupa developments, or it was these large sort of prayer meeting halls that were being built, with capacities of 6,000 to 8,000, the Akshardham kind of complex. So I think maybe we were seeing some of this happen even across the end of the 20th century, and it's now got a sort of almost like a state sanction. I think it's interesting, Romi, that you touched upon how the religious institution also was the space for capital accumulation. If we look at sort of say pre-modernist times, particularly in India, um, and therefore, I mean, yet since both of you have in your own ways a tremendous experience of looking at sort of hill settlements and mountain settlements, do you think and maybe both of you could just reflect on that, do you think that this space of religion as it uh, comes into to the social, do you think we can actually sort of in a new sense sort of refashion this argument? Um, can you see, because like you're saying, we are a religious people, but we are also multi-religious. Do you think
Romi, were you able to listen everything? Because I think I
Yes,
missed
it's
some.
he's breaking up a little bit. But
that
You're
there
breaking.
is a
Ganesh.
I've got-
possibility to
Because
generate multiple narratives, sort of?
Yes. Well, look, basically, let me just explain the basic problem of religion, which starts with a fundamental question to anybody that you can give. You can meet anybody and ask him, "Do you believe in God or don't you believe? Are you Gnostic or do you worship?" Now, first of all, you get that divide. Now, let's take the people who don't believe in God, right? This includes the whole Buddhist community. So you take it from a Shaivite or you take it from a Sanatan Dharmi, it will say, what do you mean? God exists. So you already have a potential for not resolving a problem. Now, what happens is that therefore you use a community which says we believe in God, multiple gods, etc., and we can form ourselves into a whole community. And we are against those people who either don't believe in a God or have some other God. So when you open up the whole business of the religious debate in the modern time, you have to sit and debate these issues because these are issues from which have come to us from medieval times. The the essential thing, if we want to revive anything from medieval times, is not its form and its architecture and its belief. It is, have we resolved this problem of living together, having different beliefs? What were the medieval debates? And the medieval debates are recorded. It's not as if they're missing. So these are
I
the
remember,
essential.
Romi, before you complete this, because I don't have to add anything in, but when I was in Singapore on that urban, planning training course, so Lee Kuan Yew actually clinched this. Of course, he could do it because of, he said, we'll have mixed housing. So we'll get it not just mixed in the form of, the working people and all, also, but religious. I mean, you can't have ghettos there, so he made people actually live together of different religions. I mean, just we didn't practice that at all. In fact, we are getting
Absolutely.
the worst order.
You see, this is a very
I mean, I
realistic.
just heard, I mean, today only, I mean, let me just tell you, there are places, I mean, forget about Muslims, I mean, they are the most marginalized. And we've seen the India segregation report. I mean, they don't even get a house in a city like Delhi. But even Manish Shankar's daughter don't get a house. She's been checked out. So we can know what is happening. Anyway, please go ahead.
I just want to add to that because I went to Singapore to study the situation, the housing there. They have a very interesting way of doing it. They take the population census in which your faith is entered. The proportion of each faith in the overall population has to be reflected in a micro climate of the housing estate. So let's say that there are 20% Christians, 30% Muslims. That housing estate has to have the houses in that proportion. So then a temple is built, a mosque is built, a church is built in each housing estate. Now, this is what I would call a wonderful way of adapting the problems of having differential faiths without being aggressive about them. So this way of living in a Singapore housing is the medieval way. This is how communities lived in India in medieval times. If you want to revive medieval times, it is this which is the revival, which is of value to us. It is not what was bigger built and what was even bigger built and what was destroyed and what was broken and what was rebuilt. It's a total debate which is not informative to us.
Kanishk, I think with that, because we have to leave this space, but I think we must also apologize, and I'll do it separately on the Facebook, because people are getting messages where will you be live. So we'll post it on YouTube, and immediately we'll post it on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, whatever. And then further we can push. And if people ask questions, Romi, please be free to, and I'll answer that. You'll have to do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Atul, are you there? Can you just end the meeting, please? Thank you.